Hello, and we're live for another Clojure study group. Welcome and thanks for joining. I hope you're going to find this interesting. So today we're going to do some fun with ClojureScript. So ClojureScript is I guess an implementation of Clojure, but for the JavaScript platform. So Clojure originally was created for Java and uses the JVM, the Java Virtual Machine, to run. So it's compiled to Java bytecode and run on the JVM. And with ClojureScript, obviously in the browser, there's no Java Virtual Machine, but there is a JavaScript virtual machine, a JavaScript engine. You might have heard of terms V8, which is the one that's in Chrome, and yeah, so you can run code, JavaScript code inside the browser and do dynamic things. So rather than just having a static website that doesn't really do much, you can interact and build simple or very complex user interfaces using JavaScript. And instead of using JavaScript, if you want to continue using the Clojure language, then you can do so without really any significant changes at all. It's pretty much like-for-like code. It is the same language, as the same syntax, and you can basically write Clojure and deploy that for the ClojureScript platform. You can do it for the Java platform, and you can write Clojure that will work on any platform as well. There's just a few things. Obviously, you don't do any interoperability code, so you don't call Java libraries or JavaScript libraries, and then it will run, Clojure will run on either of those platforms. So we're going to look at a ClojureScript web app that I've created, and we're going to get it deployed onto the internet, and we're going to use GitHub Pages because it's nice and simple. The app itself doesn't do a huge amount. It is kind of just a fairly simple website, but as we go on, we can add more complexity to it, and I can still publish it to GitHub Pages. We're not using a database, although we could use Firebase and other things like that as well to connect to data and save data, and also we could connect to other APIs to consume and publish data as well if we wanted to. So let me share my screen, my entire screen. Oh, that's too small to there we go, share. Present to everybody, there we go. So the website I'm doing, a website I'm going to mention is this Clojure Bridge website. We've got an event coming up. I just decided to create a fairly simple website, mainly content driven, but trying to add a bit more dynamic aspects as we go along, as I'm building as we get closer to the event. And also at the event, people could actually build a website or take this and modify and add some more interesting features to the website to make it more of a dynamic application. So this is just currently running locally, and I'm going to use GitHub Pages to be able to run this on the internet so everybody can see it. Obviously, I don't want to let the world have access directly to my laptop. That would be quite dangerous. So we can use GitHub Pages, one, because it's free. Free is always useful, but it's also very powerful and very fast as well. I don't know if it goes into this idea of a content delivery network. I haven't looked at this page for a while, but basically your content is cached all over the world, and it's so it's a pretty fast way to get to run a website that most people can access really quickly. And most people are using some kind of version control system, so you're already versioning your code. So usually in GitHub or GitLab, so it's a fairly simple process. You should be fairly used to the tools. This is this idea of Jekyll, which is a process that runs on GitHub Pages. I think that flashed up earlier on. And this can be used to process Markdown content. We're not going to use that at the moment. We're just going to deploy our application as it is, so we don't really need to have that involved as well. And so it is kind of just as simple as creating a repository on Git that's specifically going to serve up your repository. So if I go and look at GitHub and Clojure Pages London, so I've got a repository here for Clojure Pages London. So this is the existing website that's already there, it's already live, and I think this is a mixture of HTML, and there is some markup as well. So we are using the Jekyll processor as well to do that, and but it's all just served up there nicely, and it just runs off GitHub Pages. So it's a very simple way to do that. But it's quite it's a little bit verbose and like a lot of scrolly stuff going on there. So I wanted to refine that a bit, and rather than kind of edit a lot of the kind of HTML and CSS stuff, I wanted to do this and do this inside Clojure instead. So create this website, and I've used ClojureScript. I have used a nice little CSS framework called Bulma, which is bulma.io. Oh no, it's not. Bulma. What is it? Bulma. Spell that right. There we go. It seems to be going slow today. There we go. So yeah, it's a bulma.io. Maybe I spelled that wrong. Okay. And this is a very nice, simple, modern kind of framework. It's a lot smaller than Bootstrap. It doesn't have any CSS. Sorry, it doesn't have any JavaScript. It's just CSS. And I just use this from a content delivery network as well, so just documentation. So I'm just using this from overview. There is a getting started somewhere. I've lost it now. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so you can just add the CSS to include the Bulma libraries. So we're going to look at that code. Then where are we? Oh, we are in the right place. Project Vault. Go and look at our index. There we go. So I've just added this as a, oops, wrong way around. There we go. The style sheet I've included, and it's just, there it is. There we go. So I've included Bulma, and also it uses Font Awesome for things. If you want icon, pictured icons, you can use Font Awesome as well. And everything else is the same. There's also this debugging thing, but I'll cover that in a different video as well. The only thing I did add a couple of things. I added I'm using a fixed navigation bar at the top, and I did a little script, one kind of ClojureScript script, sorry, one JavaScript script to just populate the menu when it's on mobile. It just pops up the hamburger as well. But everything else is in Clojure. Core. So I've got this core file, and yeah, so it's pretty much it's Clojure. We're using reagent, and do a little bit of JavaScript interrupt just to have a little date output when each time we compile, so we know when the last time is when we've compiled during development. But apart from that, it's all pretty much ClojureScript and CSS. So let's do that. There we go. So that's all running, and this is I've just obviously saved this to GitHub on the master branch, and these are all the different sections I've just included, and each section is in the content. Oops, each section is in the content section. Contents. So we've got a file with functions, and each function is defining the sections of the web page. So we go down to the bottom, we've got our top banner, and we've got register things on there, so we can see those in our application. So this is the top bar, this is a register. And it's an all nice and a responsive design. So if I shrink this down in size, then eventually it'll go and boom, go to mobile view. And we also get the navigation bar at the top there instead of the kind of menu system. So it's all quite nicely responsive as well. So let's have a look at GitHub Pages. Any questions for that? Nope. There we go. So we can create a repository. So that's what we already did with this Clojure Bridge website. So this is set in a repository that has the same name as the account, or in this case, this is a GitHub organization. And you just put .github.io on the end, and then GitHub knows to kind of serve whatever's in the master branch as website content. And you can go in and select which branch, and I'll have to be careful not to change this because that would be bad. But if we scroll down to GitHub Pages, and it's telling us my site is currently being served up at this address. And so this is quite a nice way to, if you've got a site, you've got your own blog in your own GitHub account, you can just have your account name .github.io, which I think I do have for JRocket, which is my GitHub account, not for Clojure. I think I saved it that way. It's been a while since I looked at this. So it's JRocket. Yeah. What I've done here is I've got the actual JRocket website, jrocket.github.io repository, which serves up the website. But I've got a separate repository that is actually for the content of the website. So in this example, I'm using JRocket's GitHub.io Hexo. I'm using a tool called Hexo, which is a static site, a static website generator. So I give it a whole bunch of markdown files, and it's, as we can see, if we go into source and posts, then all the posts are just basically markdown files. And let's look at that. So you can see if we look at the raw, yeah, so it's just markdown using tags. There's some tags for Hexo as well, just to add some fancy bits with icons. But essentially, it's just hashes and stars and so on for the normal markdown content there as well. And so what I have been doing is just to have this site, and and just publish the generated finished content to this site. So this is just pure HTML and CSS. There's no Hexo specific things in here. This is just a website with all the lovely little angle brackets. Yay! There we go. So that's just published in a separate repository. So that's fairly straightforward to do. It does mean having two repositories, but it's a fairly straightforward thing to do, and it makes a nice separation. So people could contribute to JRocket Hexo repository. I could get pull requests and raise issues upon there as well. What's an issue I haven't fixed there? Yeah. Okay, that's a blog post idea. There we go. And so I can take in content and fixes and pull requests on this repository, and then have a separate control over who actually gets access to publish it. So I might have, if I have several people contributing to this, but I want to control who's maintaining, who's basically deploying something. Because we might want to have people that write content and contribute to this thing, but we want to have an authentication or authorization process before they actually, or a review process before they actually push the site there. Then having this separation kind of makes it easier because you can just have one or two people that control the deployment to this site, who have access to push changes to that site. Whereas you can make this more open to contributors and put a review process in there as well. So that's one approach with GitHub Pages, is to have kind of separation between what you publish and how you create what you publish. And that's what I've been doing quite a bit in there, but it does obviously mean having two repositories. And so another approach is to, if we go into, did I have the Clojure Bridge one? There we go. Oops. Yeah, so if we Clojure Bridge, let's go and do one I'm not worried about breaking here. So with the landing page draft, so landing page draft is the repository that's serving up the generated ClojureScript application, and this is just doing the same thing. So if we go and scroll down, oh no, draft is the content. Oops, I always get those two mixed up. Coming up with good names for things is tricky. So yes, it's landing page test. That's the one. Yes. So I've created this test environment, which again is just a repository. So before we decide to go live with this, then people can have a look at this and see what they think. And I think eventually, once everybody's happy with it, I can just publish that straight to Github Clojure Bridge London.github.io repository, and publish it to this repository instead. And that's very simple because I can just take the content we've done here and just publish it as a Clojure app. So this test is just set up to serve. If we go into settings and let's go down to GitHub Pages. So this is just this is serving up a project. So you just need to specify which branch is your GitHub. So you might not have any project, so you might start off not being any project, but you can do, so here we're using the master branch. You can specify another branch to do this as well. Usually it's gh-pages, but also another thing I found recently is that you can also use the docs folder. So you can still use the master branch, but instead of copying all the files to a separate repository, I could put the generated files from ClojureScript build into a docs folder, and it would serve that up as like whatever's in the docs folder is the root of the application as well. So if I go to, let's see if we go to not the landing page, but if we go to the original where we got the content, so in the draft here, so this is the application that I built. So I pushed all the code here, so you can see this has got the source code in here, and it's got all the ClojureScript that we're going to build. So I could build this application, and then if I put the results of that into a doc folder, then I could actually just serve up the applications from here. I could go in and just select the docs folder, and then it would serve up the ClojureScript app from the same repository. So I wouldn't need two repositories there. So let's give that a try and see if that works, because I don't currently have any GitHub pages at the moment on this repository. And so if I went to Clojure Bridge London.github.io / landing page draft, there wouldn't be anything there. It would say 404. So how do we go about building things? Let's have a look at that. Okay, so I'm using Figwheel. Oops, Figwheel. And there's two versions of Figwheel. There's Figwheel, the original version, and Figwheel-main, which is the newer version. And it's probably if you're creating new projects, it's probably the kind of the better choice now. But they both work. For simple sites, they both work. They're pretty much the same. And there's a template just like there was before. And so if you want to, so this is how I create my application. It's pretty much the same. Instead of like figwheel, you use figwheel-main. Boom, boom, boom. And I added reagent, but you can add other things like you can do with the earlier Leiningen template. And I could just run it. I'm just running it through my editor at the moment, and that's how it's running when we're actually running the application. And you can also do a one-off build. But you can also do when you're going to do a production build, so you can basically minimize the files. So it makes it much smaller ClojureScript project, and much smaller JavaScript file that's going to be created in the as a result. And it's just going to be a single file as well, so it's a lot easier to include into a repository. So if we actually have a look at what's generated, landing page. Did I keep that one up? No, didn't. Yep. So let's go back to landing page test. So this is the one I've currently deployed already. And this has got, it's just got an index HTML. If we have a look at this just briefly, you can see that as well as it's including the Bulmer library for us and Font Awesome, but I'm not sure I'm using that yet, but it's there if I needed it. And it is including the JavaScript file that's generated from our ClojureScript project. So we can see that here so when our HTML page is opened in a website, we're loading in Bulmer and some of the CSS libraries. And then when it gets to body, it's looking that there's an ID called app, and in there it's going to inject our application, which is our compiled JavaScript file, and this is where it expects to find it. Obviously, we can change that if we wanted to. So wherever we put our files for deployment, then in the root of that directory, then there should be a directory called cljs out, and then devmain.js is the file that is the file. So if we wanted to put a doc, so we would have docs/cljs out /devmain.js. That would be where our file is. So let's show you that. So if we go to the terminal, and here's one I've done earlier. So I'm just in the root of my Clojure Bridge London landing page. So this is my project. This is all my ClojureScript. And I've got some images, some CSS, and there's a lot of files that are generated when you're doing development, and it would be quite annoying to kind of copy those over and version them all, because like lots of little ones might change. And but there are lots of really useful helpers, and it's what makes Figwheel quite efficient when you're developing, because it's only going to change the specific bits. And they're all in CLJS out, but somewhere in that that long list, there'll be our devmain file in there. Oh, there we go. So that's the only file that we actually really want. So we can copy that into dev. So if we do a build, just to make sure, I'm going to do there we go. So I'm doing line clean, which is Leiningen's way of cleaning the project, just to make sure there's no stale files. And then I'm doing line figwheel and just minimizing it. So If you're using the slightly older version of, if you're just using figwheel and not figwheel-main, then the line fig might be slightly different. But it's essentially the same process that's happening. So if I do that, it's going to compile the ClojureScript application into a JavaScript application, but also minify everything. So that means it makes it nice and small, and but it's still going to work very quickly. And a smaller file just means it's going to load quicker as well. So this is where it's generating it to. And again, we could change that in the project file if we wanted to. And so I'm going to, so at the moment I don't have a doc directory. So let's create one. Let's just make dir doc or docs. Best check. Right to the settings. And it was docs. There we go. So if I create a docs folder, then we should be able to copy those into there. Docs. This is about docs, and boom, boom, and then docs is empty at the moment. And so we want to copy in some files, and all the files are in resources. So if we have a look, if we want to copy resources public, which is where we get the files. That's where we get the index HTML and the CSS and any JavaScript. And it's also where we put the images as well for copy public. And then, oops. Start again. So copy from resources public. And inside there we want, so we want the index HTML. And we can put that into docs. And we also want the CSS. So we can grab, there is some local CSS stuff. We don't strictly need this, but it is referenced by the HTML site, so, by the HTML file, so it's worth copying it across. I'll just copy that recursively to docs. And then, what else we got? We want the images as well. And I'm just copying them so that it's copying the entire folder across as well, because we need that same file structure. And then finally, we just need to be, actually, we just need to be a little bit careful. So if we make directory docs, we want CLJS, oops. And then we can copy, because we don't want to copy the entire contents of that directory. You just want to copy a single file from that. So copy from resources public. Oops, don't want to do that. Really? CLJS out. Dev main. We want to copy that to docs. CLJS out. And so that sets it up for the very first time. And then unless we change anything in the CSS or the images or in the index HTML itself, then successive builds should only really need us to copy this dev-main, dev-main JS file each time. So again, we could just have a little script to do that for us, and that would be a lot simpler, or we could just tweak the project file, project.clj file, and add something that does the same thing for us each time we build. Or just when we do we could write a little script around the build and just get it to copy that file once it's completed. That's probably the most sensible approach, I guess. So if we go back to the browser, and so we'll need to push that deployment. So if we go to, so now this is, if we go to Git, so this is just, I'm just using Magit, which is a Git client in Emacs. And what we see is that this there's this docs folder, which is saying it's untracked. So we can add that now. So we just stage that. So it's going to add. So these are all the files that we've just copied across. So we can just double check that we've got everything. So we've got the compiled application as a JavaScript file. We've got our CSS. We've got some images, and we've got the HTML file as well. So that's all. That's everything that's going to get deployed onto the website because it's being served from this docs folder. So if we commit this now, let's do another commit. Normally I'd probably write a better deployment commit message than that, but that will do for now. There we go. So let's just commit that. And then we're just going to push this. So we're still in the master branch. We haven't had to create a new branch. We've just basically created some new files in the docs folder of the master branch, and then we can just push that up to Git, up to, and this is already connected to the GitHub repository. And so if we look at the logs, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Oops, sorry. The logs, there we go. And so we then see in the history when we just look at our commit history for our project, then we can see each time when we've deployed it as well. So it keeps it all nicely together. So we can see when we've kind of versioned it. We can put tags in about which version of the application we've deployed here as well, just to have a nice way to trace the progression. And so I think I quite like this approach of having just being able to deploy from the doc thing. Let's just double check that it's actually working before I get too excited. No questions yet. So this is the repository we just pushed the code to into docs. And so if we go and select master branch, and then why is that not working? Oh, maybe I need to refresh. It worked, didn't it? Oh, I'm in the wrong. I'm in the wrong repository. Oops, there we go. Yes. There we go. So this is the repository that we've pushed the docs to. There we go. Yeah. So these are all the things there, and this is the message, git commit message. So if we go into settings and scroll down, Github Pages. So we're not serving anything up yet. So if we select master branch docs folder, select that, then it's saved the changes, and it says that this is where it's ready to be published. I wonder if it needs another push before it serves it up. It does need another push. Okay, I should have done that before doing the change. But but this gives us a chance to show the next step. So once we've deployed the initial thing, so initially it's probably a good idea to select this first, and then push your application afterwards, and then it will basically trigger each time you push a commit that hits this docs, that includes this docs folder, then the next version will get loaded into GitHub Pages when that commit is detected. So so we'll need to do another commit. So let's kind of do something that's worth committing. Let me see. It's good. Is already there. Was there any changes I wanted to do to the sites? Boom, boom, boom. Coach's guide. I could add a coach's guide. I've done that in the. Let's. Oh yeah. Let's go to my drive, and then I think I've got a PowerPoint. Yeah. Yeah. So I've got this coach readiness training thing here, which I think I want to publish that to the web. If it's not already there, and I can get the URL of this, and yeah, that's been published. So if I copy that and then put that into the link into the code, then I've got a nice change to add. So let's include this. So I'm just using Hiccup for this project. So I'm opening a vector, putting in a keyword for the HTML tag I want. I'm going to put another paragraph in here and some text. Actually, I want an image. Oh, sorry, I want a link, don't I? Let's create a link inside the paragraph. So that's a linker with a property of href. And then that's going to be this very long, and then put some text in there. Fine. There we go. Well, this is going to be on a public website, and so this is going to just add a link to that Google Doc from the coaches section. I've saved the site that should appear on my original page now. So we go to the coaches section. Yeah, we've got coach readiness training there, which wasn't there before. So that's running locally, and now I want to deploy this to the website because I'm happy with the change. So I'll go back to my terminal. I'm just going to go back and build line. So I'm going to do line clean and line fig minimize build. Press enter. And wait a few seconds, and it will build a new version of that. And the only thing I've changed was the ClojureScript website. So that's the dev-main.js file is the only thing I need to update, which that's done. So I can just copy that to the docs folder again in underneath the CLJS one. So that's where it is already writing it. And then obviously that's going to need another deploy. So if we go to Git, oh yeah, there we go. So you can see it's modified file. Make that a little bit bigger. There we go. So we've got we got CLJS out as a modified file, so we can stage that and then commit that. We just want that single file to commit, and we can put in another deploy. So a slightly better message there. And you can see the actual content of the file here. So it's meant to be not really readable by people. And although obviously you can see some content in here as well. So the strings that I've been using are still the same strings. It's just the functions have all been kind of minified to make them as small as possible. So just using single names kind of for function names. So don't worry about not being able to read it. You're not supposed to. And then let's just initiate that commit. We committed that, and that's just then P for push, capital P for push to origin master. So again, push that to the master branch, and then with luck, it should go and build our website. So that's the, I've got too many tabs open already. There we go. Yes, that's the one. Is that right now? It works! Yay! I shouldn't have really said that with so much surprise, but there we go. So I think that's probably, I don't know. I'm still in several minds about which approach to take. So you can have a separate repository. I guess that's more useful if there's multiple people working on your project. Oops, there we go. Where is it? Yeah, so you can have this separate landing test page, and obviously you could have different environments. So you could create a repository for each version. Like as it goes, if you're going to have like a test and a QA application, you could have a separate repository for each one and just push the changes to each of those repositories as and when you were ready to make those changes, and you can control who's actually driving those changes through. If you just wanted something simple, then obviously what we've done here with this draft page is to just have everything all in one repository, but having some kind of separation in. So when we're specifically going to do a deployment, we'll put that into the branch/doc folder, and then we can do a commit and push that up, and that will give us a new version of our application each time. And so that's quite nice. If it's just you, or if it's just like a couple of people you know working on something, then any of you can actually go in and publish and push a new change of the resulting application up to Clojure Github Pages, and have that working there. Is there any questions from the audience? I think, let's see if there's anything else. What have we got? Oh yeah, this is so if you're just using Figwheel, the original version of Figwheel, then rather than doing line fig, so you would do this line do clean, CLJS build once, and then min also creates a single JavaScript file as well. So that's the only difference, I guess, from the Figwheel perspective. It just works. It works pretty much the same. There's some nice efficiencies in the newer version of Figwheel, and but as there's basic functionality that we've covered today, that's the only difference you would do if you're using an earlier version of Figwheel. But if you're doing figwheel-main, then it's this figwheel-main, then you can just do line fig and then minify as well. Cool. I briefly mentioned Firebase. So Firebase is this online, web-based database. And so if you've got a mobile application, you don't have a backend, then you can still use this Firebase database. That seems to be a very common use. But if you've got, if you're deploying on GitHub Pages, then there's no database you can access in GitHub itself. You could, I guess you could access files from another repository, but that's, yeah, not quite that great. But I think Firebase is one example of things of a database that's been optimized to be used across the web as well. So it's and it's got a lot of extra things you can do. I think you can also even host. Oh yeah, you can host some web applications on here as well. And so this is, I guess, very similar to GitHub Pages. So if you were going to use Firebase for a database, or for some reason that GitHub Pages wasn't doing what you needed to do, then you could also host things on here. And I'm assuming it's a very simple process, but it doesn't actually doesn't really describe that. So I'll have a look at that and see if there's a way to do that. Because it says just deploy with one command, but it doesn't tell you what the command is. So. But there we go. Is it console? Is it docs? So I guess, oh, there we go. That's one I created. So one of the options I was going to do when we were doing the API version was to put the scoreboard into a Firebase database, and then we could put the API up on, well, you could put the data, rather than having to manage your own database, you could put the data in Firebase and serve it up from there, and then we could just use GitHub Pages or Firebase to be able to add a user interface to that as well. And what else? So that's something to explore. We've got that published. I think if there aren't any questions, I'm going to wrap it up there. And thank you very much for listening. Let's get rid of that. And I'm going to get back to building some more content. And there's a few sections in here of content I want to build out and make it look good. And at the moment, this is it's pretty much just doing, if you're interested in the project, I'll just go over a little bit. So pretty much the sections are just functions, functions names, and I'm just basically each section, each function is returning a piece of this hiccup style content that is just going to be generated by reagent. It's going to generate that into its relevant HTML, and it's just using the kind of stack. So it's the tags that you use in HTML is just using that but as keywords, and so and things like figure and class are just that's how Bulma suggests you do these things. So like and you can put in all sorts of, and these class things here are just the configuration you can do for those tags as well. So so here on these divs, we're defining a container which puts it into a nice padded area. So we've got padding around the edge. It's not right pushed to the outside of the web page, which so it kind of looks a lot nicer with the padding on left and right. And we've got a box on there which puts padding, a little bit of a margin all the way around the box, and it puts this shadow on there as well. So it helps me separate out the different sections without having to have a specific separator. And columns just helps with the responsive design. So I've got columns, which is a class that is going to contain one or more columns. And then I can define a column, and then this column's just got an image, and the next column's got some like basic content. And then when I resize it, it's going to change from spreading the columns out across the screen. It's just going to stack the columns underneath each other. So this sign up part is a column next to the title, and so in the mobile view, it's responsively moved to underneath that. And same thing with the logos and the text that go underneath it as well. So it makes it more more of an engaging experience on the mobile when you're viewing this on the mobile platform as well. So this is like 3 columns normally on the desktop, but it's on the mobile view, it's just 3 columns, one after the other. So it gives it a nice responsive design on there as well. And so most of this at the moment is just hiccup and HTML. I've just been focused on getting the content correctly. If you go to, sponsors current, using a little bit of dynamic nature. So here I'm pulling in sponsor details into as the argument to sponsor current. And it's going to pull the kind of website details from that. It's going to get website details from there. It's going to get the sponsor name. It's going to get the sponsor website again so it's got adding a couple of links in here basically. So it's adding a link around this our sponsors message and then the sponsor name. And what I've done is just put that in into the app state. So we've got this app state, and which is just an atom, so we can change the content of the state in a managed way in Clojure. And it's got a sponsor section, and that's made up of the current sponsor, but also I'm going to put in all the past sponsors as well. And so it makes it easier for us to pull that. And when we move to a new event, we'll probably get a new sponsor. So then we can just update the app state, and it will be reflected into the code in here. So we won't need to change this code because this is pulling in the sponsor details directly into this component. So whenever we update the app state, then that information is going to change for us. And we're just doing that we have this main page. So this is basically a function that is a component that just defines the whole page and the ordering of the sections as well. And so in most of these sections, they're not taking any arguments because I'm not doing anything dynamic with them. They're not using any app state. But in sponsor current, I'm specifically adding some information from the app state. And so when that changes, so we could have a little admin console that basically goes in and allows us to go and update sponsors and so on. And all the admin console would need to do is just update information in the app state. And eventually we would move this app state into we pull this from like the database as well when we're making changes. But this app state will get the sponsors current and return a map with basically name, logo, website, and message structure, and that'll be then passed to sponsor current as an argument and display the new sponsor. So if we wanted to change the message, then we could simply update the app state, and it would change the message that was displayed for the sponsor as well. Okay, well, there aren't any questions. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you found it useful. If you've got any questions on this, or if you want to have any ideas about what to cover next, then feel free to get in touch. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you. Bye-bye.